Scott was an incredible mentor to so many of us. He led by example as a consistent and passionate advocate for his students, and he was uncompromising in this regard for all members of the international education community. Before the standards were drafted, I could ask myself, what would Scott do? And even after we were several editions into the standards, I was still learning from Scott and seeking his advice and his perspective. I know I'm not alone in my gratitude for the attention and support that I received from Scott. In fact, I marvel at how vast his network was. I still wonder where he found the time to get to know so many people on such a deep and meaningful level. I will be forever grateful that Scott welcomed me into this family of professionals and friends. When Scott passed, a Brandeis student shared some words that perfectly summarize why I nominated Scott for the Wolitzer Award. The student said, "He spent time understanding me and helped shape my worldview and who I am today."
Scott was a member of the first generation of education abroad professionals. He was incredibly committed to the field, and I think he understood really early from his engagement with the forum that we weren't just working in a field, we were building it. And we needed to make it something that we could be proud of.
I am honored to speak on J. Scott Vandermeed. Scott was a friend and gracious mentor to us all. Scott's true gift was first and foremost based on people and relationships. He knew how important making those connections were for understanding each other in the work we do. As Scott himself said just last year, networking and connecting people was his passion, and he was fortunate to live his passion in his work around the world. While his time in this field was too short, I know his influence will be felt by the hundreds of colleagues I now count as friends thanks to Scott. It won't be the same without him, but his legacy will live on.
I'm honored to be part of this tribute to Scott Vandermeed, who so warmly welcomed me into the field in 2000 when I was Barnard's first full-time Dean for Study Abroad, and his friendship and support of all of my personal and professional goals is something that I will always cherish and will always be grateful for. And it's something I try to pay it forward. And now I do it even more so in Scott's honor.
Scott, in a year when we all experience so much loss, your loss has been particularly heartfelt. You distinguished yourself by speaking up, by making sure that we were all the best that we could be, particularly in the realm of inclusion. We are a field committed to connecting people across cultures. You, more than anyone else I know, connected us to each other. We knew it before you died, but it became even more clear in the wake of your death. People from across the globe shared in your loss, and we all realized that we had a shared experience in learning from you, our colleague, our mentor, and our friend. I'm honored to be able to congratulate you on winning this award today, Scott. You deserve it. Thank you for all you gave all of us.
Scott and I collaborated in many ways over more than 20 years through NAFSA, through the Rainbow Special Interest Group, and other study abroad organizations. And Scott had a special role in the creation of the forum itself, since he encouraged me to take a chance on creating a new organization that would produce standards for the field. I often told Scott that without him, the forum might never have existed, and that made him proud of his behind-the-scenes role. It was no surprise that he was elected to the first Forum Council, chairing the data committee. Scott had energy for traveling, for students, for friends, for colleagues, and for family. His action-filled life is an inspiration to all of us, proving we can have an enduring legacy, even if our lifetime is shorter than we planned. We will miss him.
I am so pleased we are commemorating and celebrating the life of my dear friend, John Scott Vandermeed, today. I met Scott at the very first Forum on Education Abroad conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 2004. Scott opened many doors for me on that day, and he opened his heart as a friend. I owe many of my professional friendships in this field to Scott. On the professional side, Scott was an early pioneer in intersectionality and identity in our field, specifically as an advisor for so many young LGBTQ students coming out as they prepared for their education abroad experience. And Scott was also a mentor to a generation of young LGBTQ professionals in our field. Through the many seminars and conference presentations, workshops that Scott gave, and his service on so many boards, Scott demonstrated a lifetime of friendship, colleagueship, and dedication to the values of access and inclusion. We lost Scott far too soon, but I am pleased that we are celebrating his lifetime achievements today.
My name is Shinji Sato, J. Scott Vandermeed's husband. It is a great honor for Scott to receive the Wolitzer Advocacy Award. Thank you very much. Scott would be very surprised to receive such a prestigious award, but I'm sure he's very happy. It is no exaggeration to say that our lives were made through study abroad. I met with Scott in 1994 when he studied abroad in Tokyo. We then moved to the United States to attend a graduate school in 1996. Scott was in the field of study abroad since 1999. He was a director and later the dean of study abroad. One of my jobs is the director of a summer program in Japan. We visited many places in both the United States and the world and met so many wonderful people. Study abroad, work abroad, or teach abroad was part of our life for 27 years. Before Scott passed away, he said he had no regret. And I then responded to him, I have no regret either. We had such a wonderful life, but Scott's life was too short. Until recently, I did not realize that we shared the same passion. My lifetime project is incorporating social justice aspects in the field of world language education. Scott's legacy is continuously alive in my heart, and I hope in your heart as well. Thank you very much.
The Award for Excellence in Education Abroad Curriculum Design Committee, here to present this year's award. My name is Valerie Slate. I'm the Senior Associate Director of the MBA Global Programs Department at Keenan-Flagler Business School at UNC Chapel Hill.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Rubin, and I'm the principal and founder of AWR International.
And I'm Tracy Weber. I'm the Director of Global Education at Bryn Mawr College.
The Forum's Award for Excellence in Education Abroad Curriculum Design honors faculty who develop and implement innovative and effective education abroad curricula. By recognizing the outstanding efforts of faculty who are committed to the standards of good practice for education abroad, the Forum hopes to inspire the field as a whole to continue to strive for enrichment of education abroad curricula and continually reflect on how we may best encourage student learning abroad. The award criteria was providing an academically rigorous program of study, developing educational objectives that foster student learning and development, and assessing the degree to which it is accomplishing each, enriching the classroom experience through the use of the location and/or unique resources, and finally, setting a precedent for exceptional approaches to fostering student learning.
Thank you, Valerie. Before we introduce this year's award winner, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the members of this year's selection committee. In addition to the three of us joining you today, I'd like to thank Devin Foxall from the School for Field Studies and AJ Young from IFSA. It is now my pleasure and honor to announce this year's recipient of the Forum's Award for Excellence in Education Abroad Curriculum Design. We had some truly innovative and inspiring submissions for this year's award, and thank all of you who submitted and shared your courses with us. This year's recipient is Dr. James Lucas of Michigan State University for his award-winning course, Great Ages, Modern World. Dr. Lucas is the Assistant Dean of Global Education and Curriculum in the Office of Undergraduate Education in the Provost's Office at Michigan State University. In this capacity, He consults with academic and student affairs units on issues related to diversity, intercultural and global education, curriculum development and assessment, faculty and staff development, and global program development. He has more than 15 years of college teaching experience and has designed and coordinated a diverse range of study abroad programs, including MSU's innovative first-year experiences. The Great Ages Modern World course provides an integration of Italian history and culture, intercultural theory, leadership theory, and gender role theory. It was co-designed by students and faculty to address the specific interests and needs of male students in the Greek life system at MSU. The course intertwines the history of leadership theory with discussion about the evolution of masculine gender roles, using Italy for comparison and contrast with the United States in an intercultural context. Learning objectives for this innovative course include the ability for participants to differentiate between the concepts of gender, sex, sexuality, sex roles, and gender roles, and how various disciplines, specifically gender studies, sociology, psychology, and health sciences, think about them in the context of male development and leadership. Participants will also learn to explain the influence of history and culture on leadership, gender roles, and gender expression. And now I am very pleased to introduce this year's award recipient, Dr. James Lucas. Jim.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you to the Forum and the Awards Committee for all the work that they do related to this award, but also for defining standards of best practice in our field, promoting excellence in global education, and for recognizing educators who are doing good work around the world. It's really appreciated. Teaching and learning has always been at the heart of my work. So regardless of the title or the time that's allocated to do teaching, it's always a priority. And so I really appreciate the acknowledgement from the forum in this group, because it's important that global educators are recognized for this effort. I think for a lot of us, teaching and learning is a vocation. And I appreciate the opportunity through this award to share my ideas with this community of practice. For many of you, engaging fraternity men in this work probably sounds ridiculous. I know I get a lot of questions and comments about that, but I will say it's a genuine labor of love. And I think one of the most important things I do every year. I also want to acknowledge that I could not do this alone. As was mentioned, students and colleagues from my university were very supportive in using this course and helping promote the program. I also need to point out that the wonderful collaboration with Accent Global Learning in helping to bring this program to life. And a specific shout out to Barcelona SAE for helping save last year's program, which occurred right around this time when COVID was hitting Europe. So definitely interesting. So thank you, everyone. And I look forward to speaking or responding to any questions that anyone has via email. My email is lucasjam@msu.edu, and I'm sure it's in the materials and at the session I'll be doing. Thanks.
Congratulations again, Jim. I want to invite everyone to come learn more about Jim's course at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today in the forum session, Solutions in Action from the Forum's Curriculum Toolbox. In addition to Jim's course, the session will also highlight two other courses that feature creative solutions to current challenges. One is Social Justice, Identity, and Language in Oaxaca, a program that creates opportunities for heritage speakers to explore issues of identity and normative linguistic pressures. And the other is a graduate seminar in occupational therapy, which went virtual in response to COVID-19 and highlights experiences in Taiwan, Vietnam, Ecuador, and Finland. Now it's my pleasure to turn the screen over to Alicia Stanley of Grinnell College, who is going to speak about the Forum's Award for Academic Achievement Abroad.
Bonjour. My name is Alicia Stanley, Director of Off-Campus Study in the Institute for Global Engagement at Grinnell College in Iowa. I have been serving as a member of the selection committee for the Award for Academic Achievement Abroad, along with my colleague, Ashley Hasley from Texas Tech University. This year marks the 5th annual Award for Academic Achievement Abroad. And despite the many challenges we all faced over the last year, we received many strong nominations from fields as diverse as public health, politics, literature, conservation, and gender studies. 14 faculty from forum member institutions reviewed the nominations, and we'd like to thank them for their time and expertise. I hope you had the chance to visit our Student Showcase poster session yesterday to learn about the other impressive projects that were nominated for this award. If you missed the live session, you can still browse the posters in the virtual exhibit hall today. We will now turn to the awardees' presentations, after which there will be time for questions. And it is my honor to introduce our first award recipient, Maya Singleton. During the fall of her 4th year at the University of Virginia, Maya enhanced her French language skills by studying abroad on the Strasbourg Field Study and Internship Program through IFE, the Institute for Field Education. Given her interest in biomedical ethics, she was thrilled to intern as a bioethics research associate in the History of Science department in the University of Strasbourg School of Medicine. Maya joined an ongoing project on never-ending infectious diseases. Her primary responsibility consisted of analyzing the legal and philosophical implications of the retroactive use of preserved bodily samples. And as you will hear, her contributions and recommendations to the research team were significant. Please join me in welcoming Maya to present her research project.
Hello, my name is Maya Singleton, and I am an alumnus of the University of Virginia, where I specialize in pre-medical studies, French, and bioethics. Today, I have the pleasure to share the study abroad research project I conducted in Strasbourg, France in the fall of 2019. I participated in the Institute of Field Education's, or IFE's, program in Strasbourg, where students have 5 weeks of intensive interdisciplinary courses, followed by a 12-week full-time internship in independent research in the field of their interests. For my internship, I worked as a bioethics research associate in the Department of the History of Science in the University of Strasbourg Faculty of Medicine under Professor Christian Bona. He invited me to work on an ongoing project referred to as the Never-Ending Disease Project. And this project aimed to find an interdisciplinary paradigm through which to retrospectively examine the persistence of syphilis, a sexually transmitted infectious disease that, when left untreated, causes multi-organ failure and even death. My primary responsibility was to analyze the legal implications of the use of preserved bodily samples. I discussed some of the ethical concerns within the project with the research team, and one concern that repeatedly came up in discussion was the idea of retroactively using samples in research without informed consent. I decided to focus my scope further of my research to ask the following question of who is the owner of these samples. And before getting too far into details, I believe it would be helpful to actually define what bioethics is. And as a bare bone definition, bioethics is more so the humanitarian aspect of medicine and clinical research. It provides a level of morality as well as protections from exploitation that can come with advancements in medical research practice and policy. Bioethics relates to the Never-Ending Disease Project because the research team desired to use human specimens collected from autopsies and biopsies that were stored in the Institute of Pathological Anatomy. These specimens dated as far back as the late 1800s, and most patients were deceased. Due to bioethics being inherently interdisciplinary, I decided to assess both the legal and philosophical implications of the use of retroactive samples, the idea of ownership, and informed consent within medical research. And these are just examples of the main legal and scholarly works I use within my project. The legal statutes range from continental obligations issued by the European Union to human rights coalition efforts taken up by the country of France itself. The legal statutes were available primarily in German and English, so my project required a high level of translation work. And the philosophical works themselves varied in scholarly opinion, observation, and publication formats. And most were available in English and French, which again required more translation work. In terms of legal implications, I discovered that human rights ideals are heavily influential in the formation and adoption of legal statutes in both France and the EU as a whole. The slides are under the protection and jurisdiction of the medical center that's conserving them. In this case, that was the Institute of Pathological Anatomy. And researchers have an ethical obligation to obtain the consent of the regulating medical center. In regards to philosophical implications, the importance of de-identification to protect the privacy of patients, and in this case, their sexual health status, was clearly evident. It was also apparent that the medical centers have a guardianship role once samples are removed from the patient's body and placed in their own protective care. I concluded that though they are detached from the human body, bodily samples are materials that cannot be owned by anyone other than the patient from whom they were removed, whether that's for research purposes or otherwise. In the case of samples used post-mortem, the bodily samples should be under the jurisdiction of the governing body preserving them. This governing body is obligated to implement measures to avoid the exploitation and commercialization of such samples. Given that there are regulations in place for the use of bodily samples, researchers must carry out their research responsibly to avoid exploiting their access. The samples should be used in the pursuit of exploration in a way that preserves the physical integrity of the body from which they were removed. In the case of pathological slides and tissue blocks, the most practical means of preservation and protection are the identification, the limitation of use, and regulations concerning their commercialization of medical research results. My conclusions were included in the submission to the School of Medicine Medical Ethical Review Board requesting approval of the Never Ending Disease Project. This project was approved by the board and is ongoing. However, due to COVID, changes in the project structure and timeline projections were made. So the challenges of studying abroad, there were some fairly challenging aspects of studying abroad. Learning a language in a classroom varies drastically from actually being able to be in a full immersion experience. And with this, my first time abroad, I honestly did not know what to expect. There was a social and cultural shift I experienced, in Strasbourg, made for something new to be learned every day. I found that saying sorry or pardon is not as popular in France as it is within the United States. And many people I talked to or bumped into while walking were confused as to why I was apologizing so much. It was crazy. But as far as work and academics were concerned, I was not very confident walking into my courses or my internship placement at first. I felt as though I didn't have enough of the proper vocabulary to convey my thoughts effectively. And even though I was a French major, this was my first time writing a minimum 30-page research paper in French. So I was constantly frustrated with myself and tried my hardest to adjust to the steep learning curve. But despite the challenges that came my way, I was grateful for the other students who had all been abroad before. My housemate, Sophie May, and my IFB mentors, especially Tarek, for pushing me to step outside of my comfort zone. I'm grateful to have left with a more solid plan of my future and what I like to do with my studies. Due to COVID, a number of graduate programs I wanted to apply to after graduation either moved to virtual courses or deferred their application cycles altogether. However, I plan to apply to bioethics master's programs and fellowships, as well as medical school in the upcoming year. I've heard many times before that majoring in a language can only take you so far, and now I can say my studies have taken me across the pond and opened my eyes far beyond what I thought possible. And to anyone else thinking of studying abroad or thinking about what they'd like to do with their futures, I have one main takeaway to share from my experience, is that sometimes the best plan is to have no plan at all. And on this slide is a picture of me and my housemate, Sophie May, and the rest of the pictures were from our experience backpacking across southern France for 5 days. And we only left with the bus ticket and an Airbnb for the first night. So our trip was really planned as we went along, which is probably the most ambitious and unexpected thing I've ever done. But I appreciate the experience of actually saying that being impulsive in some cases is okay and can actually get you far in certain situations. And for my acknowledgements, I thank you all for listening. I would like to thank UVA's ISO French coordinator, my French major advisor, and all of UVA French faculty. In addition, I would like to express my utmost appreciation to all those who contributed to the success of my internship and the realization of my project, especially the directors of my internship, Professor Christian Bonat and Mary Jo Thiel, as well as the directors of IFE Study Abroad program, Tomas, Timothy, Emily, and Tarek. I'd also like to thank those in DHPS for their unconditional support, advice, writing assistance, and daily encouragement. I thank all the collaborators who helped in drafting the submission to the Medical School's Ethics Committee to gain approval for the Never Ending Disease Project. And finally, I'd like to thank the Forum on Education Abroad for selecting me for the Academic Achievement Abroad Award. And a big thank you to Amelia and Miss Alicia for helping me format this presentation. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Hasley, and I'm the Program Manager for the College of Engineering at Texas Tech University. It is my honor to introduce the next award recipient, Calder Halden. She is currently in her final year at Pomona College, where she is majoring in general studies while also taking pre-health courses. This past year, she was able to participate in the SIT Buenos Aires Public Health and Urban Environments program. This program was to complete a 5-week independent research project. She has a strong interest in reproductive health, therefore she decided to do her research project over infidelity and assisted reproduction legislation in Argentina. Although her time was cut short in Argentina due to COVID-19, she was still able to complete her research from home. Please join me in welcoming Calder to present her research project.
Hi, my name is Calder Holland, and I'm so excited to be able to talk to you guys today about the research that I did when I was abroad. Growing up, I always knew that I wanted to make study abroad, especially in a Spanish-speaking country, part of my college experience. Also, as both a gender and women's studies major and a pre-health student, I wanted my program to relate to both of my academic interests. The SIT Buenos Aires Public Health and Urban Environments program seemed like the perfect fit for me. And the aspect that really sealed the deal was that every student had the opportunity to complete a 5-week independent research project at the end of the program. I did my project over infertility and assisted reproduction legislation in Argentina. And even amidst a global pandemic during spring 2020, this project was ultimately one of the most fulfilling things that I've done during my college career. So one of my strongest interests has always been reproductive health, hence my combination of a gender and women's studies major and pre-health courses. I knew that I wanted my research to center around this, and I was specifically very interested in infertility and assisted reproduction. Assisted reproduction refers to medical treatments that work to mitigate the effects of infertility and result in a successful pregnancy. Some common examples are IVF or in vitro fertilization, which is the most common, as well as surrogacy. During my initial literature review, I was very excited to find that the field of assisted reproduction in Argentina is quite interesting. In 2013, the country passed one of the most progressive laws in the entire world regarding assisted reproduction, making treatments free and available to everyone in the country, including LGBTQ and single patients, which is pretty remarkable because normally when these kinds of laws are passed, they often don't include those patients. In contrast, in the US, to put it in perspective a bit, assisted reproduction is rarely covered under health insurance, and for patients who pay out of pocket, which is most, the average cost of IVF to achieve a successful pregnancy is $60,000. This is cost prohibitive for most Americans and essentially creates a system where only wealthy people are able to, quote unquote, overcome an infertility diagnosis. So I was really fascinated by this, and I decided to do my research project over this law, interviewing healthcare providers and seeking to answer 3 main questions. First, how has the field of assisted reproduction changed in the 7 years since this law was put into place? So what have its effects been? Second, what is the opinion of healthcare providers towards this law and towards the various kinds of patients seen under this law? And third, this is kind of my personally most interesting question to me, are there groups of people who still have difficulty accessing these treatments in Argentina despite this universal law? So basically, who is falling through the cracks? So after doing this research, I decided to narrow down my scope a little bit and look specifically at 2 places in Argentina that I thought gave me kind of a good cross-section. Buenos Aires, the capital and biggest city in the country, as well as where we were headquartered before we had to leave, as well as Bahia Blanca, a smaller city a little more towards the south that served as a hub for the rural area around it. So kind of getting this juxtaposition of major metropolis compared to smaller metropolis, a little bit more of a rural clientele. I interviewed 6 healthcare providers over the phone, 2 doctors, 2 psychologists, and 2 lab technicians. And among these, I also specifically sought out people from a mix of public and private clinics, again, to kind of get that breadth of perspective. After doing 30-minute interviews with each of them, I wrote a 50-page research paper in Spanish comprised of a theoretical analysis of infertility, a socio-political background of Argentina, so kind of looking into, why and how did this law even get passed in the first place, and most interestingly to me, an analysis of the interviews. This experience pushed me out of my comfort zone in a really good way, and I ended up accomplishing things that I never thought were possible before I went abroad. The longest paper I'd ever written before this had been 18 pages in English, so writing a 50-page paper in Spanish was definitely a leap into the unknown. Doing phone interviews with professionals in the field entirely in Spanish showed me just how much my language skills had improved over the course of my abroad program, which was honestly a little bit surprising to me pleasantly, because I'd done most of the program from home in Kansas, and so it really hadn't been the immersive experience I had expected. I'm someone who normally gets a bit of phone call anxiety even in English, so I was pretty apprehensive at first about the interviews. By the 4th or 5th one, I felt completely at ease. The 3 weeks I spent in Argentina, although they were brief, pushed me out of my comfort zone all the time, as I was constantly meeting new people, living with a host mom who only spoke Spanish, which this is her on the right here, and navigating a new city. When I went back to Kansas, which is the 2 photos on the left, my newfound confidence in being outside my comfort zone really helped out. And I find this picture on the left kind of funny. That's mate, which is a traditional Argentinian drink. We drank it with our host families, with our program directors. I actually got that little cup from the program directors. but I'm sitting in my childhood home, which is like a farmstead in Kansas. So it really was a sort of juxtaposition of the very, very familiar as well as the completely new that I think was pretty emblematic of the unique experience of doing abroad from home. So after I transcribed, coded, and analyzed my interviews, I came away with a few main takeaways. First, I had asked about, what has the impact of this law been? Providers across the board felt that the 2013 law had resulted in a huge boom in the field of assisted reproduction in Argentina. They also talked a lot about this having happened sort of concurrently with a social movement towards talking more about infertility. And so they felt that the field would continue to grow as both legislation but also social attitudes became more progressive. Secondly, providers displayed an overwhelmingly positive attitude towards LGBTQ patients, which I have been interested in because it is just so rare to include those patients in these kinds of laws. But on the other hand, I noted some clear examples of classism from my interviewees. When I asked if low-income patients were able to easily access treatments, one doctor told me that he felt that low-income patients didn't need infertility treatments. They needed to be having fewer kids and more contraception, which was definitely shocking to hear from a healthcare provider. Third, and this is getting at my question of who was falling through the cracks, there were several clear disparities in access to treatments. Surrogacy is notably not covered by the law, and so is still cost prohibitive for patients like gay couples and women with non-functioning uteri. The public system, which is available to all but primarily accessed by low-income patients, suffers from deficits of supplies and personnel and often involves hidden costs for medications that complicate the idea of free for all. Finally, a lack of treatment clinics in rural areas means that some people have to travel 600 or 700 kilometers to access treatment, which can again be financially inaccessible. So all of this leads me to some future directions and recommendations that I came away with. First, providers identified a need for consistent and unified regulation, and we talked about this a lot in regards to surrogacy, which kind of exists in this legal gray area they described it as in Argentina. So really, they talked about a need for a little more consistent regulation with that. Second, there should be an overhaul of the public system to provide better and wider access, so getting at a couple of those problems that I talked about in the previous slide. And third, and this is kind of in response to what that one doctor and actually a couple of my other interviews as well talked about, there is a need for a fundamental reimagining of infertility in order to understand the disproportionate impacts on low-income communities and avoid discriminatory thinking. One of the most interesting things I learned was that during my literature review, I realized that a lot of people think of infertility as sort of a thing that affects wealthy people. But due to lack of access to reproductive healthcare, it actually is more common in low-income communities. And so I think that's something that really needs to be centered as we go forward like this. And these three pictures are actually from one of my most favorite things I did when I was in Argentina, as brief as it was, which was I got to go to the Women's March, kind of like the Women's March we have in the US. It was just so cool to see, hundreds, thousands of people out there protesting for reproductive and sexual rights. There definitely is an energy towards it there. And I think that there are recommendations and improvements to be made, but I do have faith that those hopefully will happen in the future. Also, I think it's really important, looking towards future directions, I think that these takeaways can ideally be helpful not only for Argentina to modify their current system, but also for other countries like the US to learn from as hopefully we move towards adopting similarly inclusive policies in the future. Right now, I'm writing my senior thesis based off of this with a little bit more of a gender studies focus. And I think that doing research in this field in the future is kind of always going to be part of my future career. I find it a really fascinating topic, and I think there's so many different ways you can go with it. I've actually applied to a couple international fellowships that would, fingers crossed, take me back to Argentina. So I would be able to expand upon this research, which would be really amazing because I just didn't get as much time there as I'd hoped. And I really hope to go back at some point. So overall, I think Argentina and its research will end up being part of my life in the future in some way. And of course, I want to thank everyone who made all of this possible. From on the left, from SIT and Pomona College, the people who helped to get me abroad and also helped navigate such a tumultuous time almost exactly a year ago, helping us get back to the US and sort of navigate transitioning to an online format, as well as from the Forum on Education Abroad. Thank you so much for selecting me for this award. And also a big thanks to Ashley and Amelia for helping me to, plan out this presentation. I am so honored to have been able to be selected for this award and also to be able to present about work that I am so passionate about. Thank you all so much for listening.
Congratulations, Maya and Calder, and thank you so much for sharing your wonderful presentations with all of us today. Attendees, please click on the Zoom link above to join the live Q&A session. We look forward to seeing you there.
Looks like we've got everyone, so let's get started here. I'm going to start with the question. that I want to ask you all, and I'm going to ask Calder if you'd answer first. And the question is, what is a challenge that you dealt with during your time abroad, and how did you deal with it? How did you overcome it?
Yeah, so this one might be a little obvious, but I was abroad almost exactly a year ago when the coronavirus pandemic really hit. It first of all, I think, was interesting being in South America because it was one of the last continents to go. I think Asia kind of evacuated first. I had a lot of friends in Europe, and that happened second, and we were sort of waiting to see what was going to happen then. We were talking earlier, and Maya was talking about, you can prepare as much as you can for something and still not be prepared. And I think that was really present there because none of us really knew how to handle it at all. And so that was kind of part of getting over the challenge, was realizing there was so much we couldn't control, and we really just had to do what we could to get safely back to the US. I was actually on the last flight directly to the US out of Argentina. So I think it was definitely challenging. It was really challenging to navigate closing borders, but ultimately, I think it taught me that I can adapt to many different challenging and chaotic situations by kind of working on what are my immediate needs, essentially.
Thanks, Calder. And how about you, Maya? A challenge you encountered during your time abroad and how you overcame it?
Main challenge for me was that this was actually my very first time leaving the United States. And I could tell that being in France is way different than being in a classroom with other students. So it was an adjustment to get used to a full immersion experience. But it was nice because other students that were with me had also been to France multiple times before, and also Tarek, who is the IFA Strasbourg coordinator, who was very helpful in that he integrated different cultural aspects into our courses. So there wasn't a lack of knowledge as far as what we could do in Strasbourg and other opportunities.
Thanks, Maya. We have a question for each of you from our participants in the chat. So I'm going to first ask this one that came in for Calder. Calder, could you expand a little bit on how you handled the research aspect of your work from long distance after you came home because of COVID?
Yeah, so when things hit and we came back, we really had just begun kind of the ideation process. So we had just begun outlining. So really, we did the bulk of the research project from a distance. I think there was honestly an unexpected benefit of the fact that the pandemic was so early in its stages. I was talking with healthcare workers, but they weren't essential workers because they were working in assisted reproduction. And so Argentina was on a very, very strict lockdown. And I almost think there was an unexpected side benefit because a lot of people were in their homes, schedules hadn't completely returned to normal yet. So I was really shocked that I had a really high response rate just from sending cold emails to people. So I think that was an unexpected benefit. One unexpected detriment, I guess, was that normally I would have done an observational component as well, where I would have not only interviewed providers, but spent a day in their clinic, looking around, getting a sort of a feel for how things were. And I really wasn't able to do that at all. So I think there were definitely pros and cons, but ultimately we went back home, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to do it at all. So I was really happy that we were able to pull it off in some capacity.
Yeah, that was very lucky. Maya, this question from our attendee for you is asking whether your research impacted what you plan to do in the future.
Actually, yes, it did. Bioethics being so wide and various and interdisciplinary as it is, there are many things you can decide to focus in. And due to my study abroad project, I found that clinical research ethics is something that I'm really, I'm good at. For one, writing a 37-page paper about it, but also something that really piqued my interest as far as the ethics of research in vulnerable populations. In this case, these people were deceased, and it was mostly me speaking on their behalf and finding a way to respectfully include them in medical progress without exploiting the fact that they were deceased. So it definitely influenced my focus as far as what I like to focus on in bioethics.
Very cool. Wonderful, Maya. I'm going to stick with you, Maya, and have you start this question first, but it's going to be for both of you. So Calder, get ready. The next question from our colleague is, you both spoke of the challenges of applying your classroom language skills to the field and on-site or region-specific cultural and language interactions. What were some of the methods you used to improve and apply your language skills and step outside of your comfort zone as far as language is concerned?
For me personally, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, any music in French, any podcasts in French, news in French, to really get used to the sound and hearing it. I also hung out with a lot of the people who worked at my internship, and we would go to cafes, have coffee, and things of that nature. And just being as immersed in the French language and people within Strasbourg as much as possible. And it really helped me become more confident and comfortable with speaking. Of course, being in a medical lab is a whole different story as far as vocabulary is concerned, but and there was a learning curve there. But other than that, it was really just getting used to my environment. Then after that, French flowed much easier.
How about you, Calder?
So I definitely think the biggest thing for me was everyone in my program lived with a host family, and that was huge for me. Because I was with my host mom and she didn't speak any English, and so that I think was just such an immersive experience. I think being in the house and having like any small talk I wanted to do, whether it was like asking what we were having for dinner or remarking about things. I feel like I almost got a crash course in politics because every night we would talk about the COVID pandemic and all the developments. So that was really interesting. I definitely regretted not having that when I went back home. But I did keep in touch with my host mom. We would call every week during the program. Now we call every couple months or so. And I think another big thing for me is I was honestly kind of shocked by how, because I was leaving this immersive environment, I was like, oh my gosh, I really wanted to learn Spanish and I'm worried I won't be able to learn as much when I'm home. I was actually shocked. So I was like living at my childhood home in Kansas. I was like dreaming in Spanish and thinking in Spanish, which I normally associate with like being in a Spanish speaking country. So I was impressed by like the impact of having all of these web classes in Spanish. Definitely still had not quite the same effect, but a good effect on my Spanish as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just in a session yesterday about language learning on study abroad, and I think you two are really great examples of how you can do that well, and students who cannot be afraid of it. So that's really great. Thanks for sharing that with us. We have another question for our audience, and they start, by the way, I should say, if you're looking in the chat, both of you, you're getting lots of congratulations, and there's a congratulations at the beginning of this as well. Congratulations on your award. They ask, what advice would you give to students who are interested in engaging in research abroad? Or in addition to the research, what other things might be important to consider and prepare? So I'm going to let Calder start on this one.
Yeah, that was definitely something that guided my, I think I said this in my presentation, but that guided my selection of my program was that I really liked the idea of doing research abroad. I think it just opened my horizons in so many ways, being able to consider things on an international scale, being able to do some comparative things to what we're doing here in the US was fascinating. So first of all, I think I would just really encourage people to do things abroad. One thing that I did really like about my program was that they paired us each with a sort of expert in our field. So I got to actually work one-on-one with like a person whose papers I had found in my literature review. So it was really cool to be able to, I'm writing my thesis now, and when I'm citing her still, I'm like, oh, I know her personally. That was really, really cool. And I think that was helpful because doing research in another country is a little bit intimidating. I didn't really know the frameworks. It was more challenging, I think, to find what papers were relevant because like Maya said, it is hard to do that translation work. So that was very helpful. I also think beyond research, it was really important for me to get in touch with cultural aspects. That was a little harder when I was at home, but I really did think that the host family structure was helpful for that when I was abroad because I think all of our people were basically host moms. They're like personal friendships. We would often like go along to joint gatherings with the host moms and the students. And I think that was a really cool way of getting that like intergenerational connection to the country.
Thanks, Calder. And you, Maya, any advice for students thinking about doing research abroad?
Yes, thinking about study abroad programs, I would try to find one that's closely related to your interest. And also one that you would be comfortable with. For me personally, I liked Strasbourg because it was more so of a small town feel rather than something big like Paris or another very popular city within France. And even then, it was a kind of like the host center for many different research think tanks and government buildings. And I knew my project that I had in mind would have something to do along with laws and different coalition efforts and research. So it made it somewhat easy to find an internship that was aligned with my interests because they had so many resources related to my interests in France. And also, of course, thinking about language barriers, being very open to learning vocabulary that you weren't exposed to before. Because to me, I had the thoughts, they were just in English. And putting them into French was a whole nother ball game entirely. And again, involved a lot of translation work. But it was me having the idea of what I wanted to do, but also being aware that it may not go as planned. As like I said, sometimes the best plan is to have no plan at all. And that I knew what I wanted to do, but at the same time, I was open to changes. And those changes led to me actually directly contributing to the project that I was a part of. So I'm thankful for that.
Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. This is going to be our last question that we have time for. I'm going to have Calder start us off on this one. And this question comes from an attendee who's asking, are there any lessons you learned during your time abroad that you want to apply to your future travels? And where do you want to go next?
Yeah, definitely. I said this earlier, but I really think I traveled a little bit before this, and a little bit. I had a brief experience traveling independently on my own. But I think I honestly just feel a lot less scared now because I have experienced like such a chaotic time. I feel prepared to handle the littler things now. I think when I have the perspective of it's not as bad as a global pandemic where you have to leave the country immediately, other things become much more manageable in comparison. I would love to go back to Argentina. I really was fortunate enough to travel for about a week beforehand, and I'm so glad. I had been debating doing that or not, and I'm so glad I did because I was able to see a couple things that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten to see, but I really do want to go back. Beyond that, I don't know. I'm hoping to go, I really like to travel to Asia once things get a little, once the pandemic sort of cools down a little bit, but yeah, love to go back to Argentina at some point.
How about you, Maya? What did you learn that you'll apply to your future travels, and where will those travels take you?
I learned to be a little bit more ambitious as far as if I want to do something. I'm a huge planner and I like to plan things, but there are some experiences I wouldn't have gotten exposed to if I had gone with the plan that I had. So for me personally, as far as graduate schools are concerned, I really want to go get my master's in bioethics and apply to programs that are outside of my comfort zone, like London, or even returning back to Strasbourg, France. Of course, when this pandemic is a little less global, I guess the word, I would still like to travel elsewhere and just be able to be in an area I'm uncomfortable with, just to be, not to actually have to do a checklist of things to be there. Just experience it for what it is.
I like it. I like it. Living in the moment, being present, soaking it all in. It sounds like a lot of fun. I think we're all eager to be able to do more of that post-pandemic. And I have a fun surprise for our AAAA winners today, because I'm very pleased to share that the forum will be sending each of you a cash prize that will hopefully help fund some of those future travels someday. So thank you very much for sharing your work with us, for inspiring us here in Education Abroad, and for being great students and great presenters. And we wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors, your future studies, travels, and whatnot. I'd also like to thank Alicia Stanley from Grinnell College and Ashley Hazley from Texas Tech for being the members of our selection committee and mentors to these incredible student award winners today. So thank you all, and I wish you all a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you so much to all of the lovely chats.
Yes, thank you for all the congratulations. That's really sweet. Thanks you guys for even being interested in studying abroad. Honestly, this wouldn't be a thing without you guys actually for starting and appreciating students for what they can do.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks, Calder. Bye, everyone. Take care.